Divorce lawyers of Reddit. What's the most outrageous reason someone filed for divorce? Was a loud chewer at the dinner table. He developed a complex and literally needed out as he couldn't bear to eat with her. Hey, sometimes annoying dinners can be enough to make you want to just end your whole marriage, I guess. I worked for a law office where the owner would talk about the man who sued for divorce because his wife would no longer allow him to use any loaded gun as a marital aid. She had apparently agreed to it at some point and was fine with the gun as long as it was empty, but that just wasn't good enough for him. I gotta be honest, I don't really understand this one completely, but it sounds a little sketchy. My client was the outrageous one, so my heart went out to his poor wife. He had OCD, which manifested primarily financially, so he made her lives a penny-pinching hell. Example, he was obsessed with avoiding unnecessary driving, wear and tear on the car, gas expenses, so he cut the whole family's hair at home and never let them eat at a restaurant or go to the movies. Weirdest of all, he kept one toilet paper roll on him at all times, and you had to get one square from him before you could go to the bathroom. He never gave more than one square. Wife finally got fed up and left him when 1. He gave her bangs during an in-home haircut, and 2. Their daughter was so traumatized by the toilet paper thing they couldn't potty train her. Also, he hated paying his divorce lawyer's bill. He was also an old-fashioned mega-Catholic who considered divorce a deadly sin. He viewed my whole job as an unnecessary and sinful expense. Man, I feel bad for lawyers that have to defend people like this. But hey Dad, now you hear about somebody who's cheaper than me, there you go. My dad was a divorce lawyer. He had a client who wanted to divorce her husband for 2 reasons. 1, he did not have enough hair on his chest, and 2, he did not drive fast enough. Keep in mind, this was in the 70s when chest hair was a bit more important. The funny thing is, the 70s are probably the only time when this divorce would make any sense. Wasn't the reason, but did happen during the course of the divorce. Neither side would follow the court orders. When they had to go back to court, they were fighting over a pistol and the man's grandmother's bowls. I assumed for weeks that these bowls were some sort of heirloom or expensive china. When they finally brought the bowls in to swap, they were freaking Tupperware. A lot of divorce stories just sound like adults fighting like children, where it's like, I don't really want it, but they want it, so I don't want them to have it, so that means I want it. A colleague handled a case where money was not an issue, but the kids were. Neither parent wanted them. Sounds like one big happy family. She was kidnapped in Mexico, and he refused to pay ransom. Eventually her family managed to pay, and she was left on the side of the road. It is not outrageous as in petty, but outrageous as how absurd that is. If you ever want to see your wife again, send us $10,000. 10,000? That's too much, just keep her. I had some friends get divorced because she legit hated Dale Earnhardt, and he legit hated Jeff Gordon. You know, it's only thanks to the channel Emp Lemon that I even know that this is related to NASCAR. But how do you get all the way deep into marriage without knowing that about another person? You would think that these red flags would have come up before you got married. Paralegal here. Still remember an early case I worked on. A man divorced his wife for her bingo addiction. 10 to 12 times per week she went to bingo. She was 82 and he was 86. But the all-time greatest, 2 20-somethings, they were irreconcilable because he kept smoking her weed stash when she wasn't home. You know, in both of these stories, the age group was the most stereotypical thing possible. How 80-year-olds all they do is play bingo, and 20-year-olds all they do is smoke weed. The dog he bought me pissed on the carpet. Aw, come on, he's only doing that because he likes you. I was a legal assistant when this case came in, but this lady divorced her husband of 2 months because he got her an iPad case for her birthday instead of the expensive jewelry she wanted. I guess those spoiled rich kid stories can carry over the spoiled rich wives stories. Had an argument with the new in-laws during the wedding, and moved out at around 5 a.m. during the first night. Man, are these guys just trying to speed run a marriage? How are you already, falling apart on the first day? Not a divorce lawyer, but used to practice criminal defense work. Once had a heavily pregnant client that attacked her husband, of less than a year, with an iron. Said client was now sitting in a police cell, sobbing and insisting that her husband deserved it and she wanted a divorce. I asked what he had supposedly done, assumed he'd cheated or something similar. Turns out she'd checked his phone and found a single porn site in his browsing history, from over 2 years beforehand. Not the most pleasant thing to discover, but hardly worth battering him half to death and demanding a divorce. Man, I bet the guy was more ready than she was to get a divorce there. He was frustrated by her hoarding. She was frustrated by his utter uselessness. He filed for divorce, and she was my client. Her prized possession was a room or two full of scrapbooking materials. His prized possession was a yard full of junk cars that he never worked on. They had no children and no real assets. They hated each other more than any 2 people I'd ever met, and the only terms they would agree to were these. He gets the scrapbooking stuff, and she gets the cars. My client also took the house, as he had no income and didn't want it anyway. It was the shortest divorce decree I ever drafted. I intentionally squeezed it onto 1 page, and the judge and I had a good laugh over it. Once the decree was signed and filed, she hauled all of the scrapbooking stuff to the yard, and he removed it to the dump. She then called a junk shop I referred her to and had all the cars removed from the yard. Well, it sounds like their hatred for each other really cleaned up the house. Maybe now they can just get back together and live in a clean place. He got drunk at the wedding, she did not like it, and decided to divorce him right after the honeymoon, which she went to without him. Moreover, this was an elaborate scheme of divorce robbery, because the guy was loaded, and so was his entire family. They were loaded because they were a family of excellent lawyers, and he had a third-generation lawyer, with all the smarts and experience of his predecessors combined. Let's just say it did not go well for her. Well, I just have to say cheers to that guy. This may be an unpopular take, but alimony should have been abolished decades ago. I didn't like her anymore, 2 days after being married. Is this just what happens when children get married? I changed my mind. That was a whole week ago that I liked her. Failed exorcisms. The client had an inner ear condition that caused chronic vertigo, but symptoms could be treated with medication. Husband was an evangelical who was convinced his wife, 1, had become possessed and that her vertigo and general crankiness with his methods were evidence of demonic possession, and 2, the medication she was taking was enabling the devil to hide inside her, and 3, the only proper recourse was exorcism. He would hide her meds until she got dizzy, and then try various methods of exorcism. This included sweating it out, put under a blanket while incapacitated and locked in a room full of space heaters, or freezing it out, pretty much the reverse with AC, fans, and bags of ice. Surprising it out, he would jump out and scare her like it was the hiccups, but instead of yelling boo, he would recite the Lord's Prayer of Psalms. The final straw was when he tried to surprise it out of her by pushing her down the stairs when they were heading out for dinner. No, this guy was some type of executive, and they still went out to dinner after the stairs incident. She asked for the divorce at an Applebee's that night. I've often tried to picture that conversation, as she was adamant that he was a total sweetheart and never acted out of malice or anger. Do you ever hear stories of just psycho people and you're just like, you know, I'm pretty glad I live alone, and I'm pretty glad that most of the people I know are fairly boring. I used to work at a general practice firm, and the guy that worked across the hallway from me was a family law attorney. He was a good attorney, but every day I would hear him yelling on the phone at his clients. One day I asked him why he did it when it was obviously stressful in a non-legal work type of way. He pointed out that there's one chapter of statutes dedicated to it, and you need to know a little civil procedure, and that's about it. It's an amazing system of business. Not only is not that difficult from an intellectual rigor perspective, but holy crap, those family law attorneys make serious bank for willing to put up with the headaches. I would routinely hear him yelling at clients like, "Don't go over there. I'm instructing you not to go there. If you go there, I will fire you as a client, and when you go to jail, I won't take your call." For the record, this was in a fairly affluent suburb. Most of the disputes that would drive him into my office for a break would revolve around parents wanting to know their recourse for ex-hubby dropping the kids off 4 minutes later than agreed, and how the client planned to get even. I also recall one time a client had gotten his cell phone number and called him on a Saturday evening with some emergency. Spoiler, his ex had done something egregious, like took the kids to the pool without his consent. So on Monday morning, the attorney sent the client an invoice for $500 for a Saturday phone call, which probably lasted like 5 minutes. He did it so the guy would call him and say, "What's this?" And then the attorney could explain to him that is what he charges for non-emergency weekend calls. This time he'd waive it, but if he ever did it again, he could be sure to get a bill that he'd end up paying. Man, it almost seems like becoming a lawyer is just like you get paid a fortune just to be involved in everybody's drama. A staff attorney for a judge. Not a divorce, but a custody modification hearing. Ex-wife wanted sole L&P custody for the kids because the ex-husband was spending all his money on a palm reader / psychic and refused to pay child support. On cross, ex-wife's attorney got him to admit that he was spending all his discretionary income on this psychic. He said he had spent over $5,000 on readings and other services there. Judges frequently chime in with questions in domestic matters, so my judge asked why he was not paying support as his divorce decree required. His explanation was, 1, the psychic could read that the children were provided for without his money, and 2, he would be able to repay the ex when he takes the children to Mexico permanently to seek great riches there, which my judge read as, "My psychic told me to kidnap my kids." You know, psychics have got to be one of the oldest scams in the book. It kind of blows my mind that people still fall for it. My grandfather's brother was a judge who presided over state-issued marriages from time to time. One couple he married returned 6 months later to confirm the wedding and end their trial marriage. When he thusly informed them that they were no such thing, and that they had been married for 6 months, they subsequently broke up. I wonder what was going on in that trial marriage. Maybe they were living together and they're like, man, this is so boring. Maybe let's go get it confirmed. Like, let's turn this into an official thing. But then they're like, wait, this is official? This is as good as it gets? Well, that's lame. I guess let's just do something else. Not me, but a friend my mom has divorced her husband because his mother still coddled him at age 40, with his consent. They lived with his mother. By coddling, I mean that she would walk straight into their room after his shower and powder his back for him. They couldn't lock their bedroom door because his mother would come in as and when she wanted. If they locked the door, she would knock repeatedly, asking what they were doing. Like, what would they possibly be doing? Playing poker? Huh, I thought that relationships like this only existed in TV shows. I knew a guy from a high school job who divorced his wife of 2 months because she would sleep with a nightlight, but he could only sleep in total darkness, as they apparently never lived together until after getting married. He hated her nightlight so much that he would often sleep on the couch instead, but sometimes he would claim the bed for himself and lock her out of the bedroom for the night. This was an eccentric late 40s man working at a Burger King who acted like all the other high school co-workers were his best chums, and often told us these weird stories. I'm glad I don't work with him anymore. I mean, what do you really do if two people are like completely incompatible of sleeping next to each other? I guess maybe you could just work out having separate rooms or something. A friend of mine divorced his then wife because she would only speak French when her family would come over. She was Spanish, as was her family. To add, her family spoke English, French, and Spanish. He could only speak Spanish and English. She got bored of being married to him. Her family basically talked crap about him while he was there, and was only when he recorded a conversation while they were there and got it translated he found out what was going on. Yeah, if they're trying to hide a conversation from you, it's probably not a good thing. Unless they're trying to plan a surprise party for you, though. Imagine if he just spoiled a whole party with that translation. I'm a lawyer that handles quite a few divorces, among other things, and I've seen all sorts of reasons for marriages ending. The only thing that is consistently true, and relevant to this question, is that it's never for just one reason, and it's never one-sided. In fact, I've started telling potential clients in our initial interview that I am well aware that I'm going to uncover some dirt on my client in the process. Not to scare them, but to put their mind at ease when I've seen worse. The fact that you haven't been 100% an angel up to this point doesn't scare me, and I'd rather find out about it from my client beforehand than later on from their spouse at the worst possible moment. All this is just to say that when you hear about people's divorcing over one stupid argument or mistake, usually that's just the straw that broke the camel's back. That said, some of the lighter straws I've seen include a guy that was 100% convinced that his wife, our client, is actually a lesbian in love with his sister and was just using him as cover. But he also claims that she's having sex with me to pay for her legal fees, and with every male whose phone number is in her call history. Another was a woman who was divorcing my client because he was too sad after his father died last year. My client had to break down her door to get his father's ashes a few weeks after he left the house, and she refused to let him back in or give them to him. And a woman who claims my client was emotionally abusive towards her because he refused to yell at her, and sat in silence ignoring her when she screamed at him. He has this recorded, time-stamped for the dates and times she insisted the incidents occurred. And she's listened to them and his complete silence as she goes on tirades and insists this proves her point that he was emotionally distant and abusive. Man, there was a lot there in that post, but the whole thing about it's never about just one little thing, that pretty much just sums up my whole commentary about this video. I mean, if two people are perfectly compatible and they really love each other, it's not gonna get broken up by just one little thing. I worked as a paralegal for a divorce lawyer. Case analysis was one of my main responsibilities. I kid you not, a recently married couple of 2 years broke it off because the husband would not stop feeding the dog. The dog got outrageously fat. Apparently she saw connections between the dog and future children. I mean, was it just that he couldn't put up with the sad face of the dog trying to guilt him into giving him more food? Or was it just that he found it really entertaining watching the dog eat? I got into scams because of a lawyer in my old office represented a woman whose husband left her because she got involved in a romance scam that started as a pen pal. It was a weird marriage. He was clearly a closet gay who married her for her money because she was super ugly. They kept separate lives for 30 years. She began corresponding with someone she believed was a 3-star general serving in Afghanistan. It went the typical way scams like this do. She fell in love and he needed money to move from Afghanistan back to the United States. She eventually would transfer him about $70,000 over the course of 8 months. Even when my friend brought me into this conference room to lay out the case as being a scam, for which I had piles of proof for, she continued to transfer money, including an $8,000 transfer the day after. The judge ruled that she owed the husband dollar for dollar what she gave the scammer. So $70,000, plus he issued a temporary restraining order barring her from transferring marital assets. My friend dumped her as a client when she showed interest in appealing that TRO and trying to expedite her divorce so she could marry the scammer. Man, what is even going on in this story? I feel like this is a Dr. Phil episode. I don't even feel like I'm qualified to say anything about this. My 90-year-old client, the husband, and his son retained me to initiate divorce proceedings with his 88-year-old wife. They'd been married for 60 years. The wife had recently taken to beating him with his own cane, because their daughter poisoned her into thinking he was hiding money from them. The battle came down to the husband and son versus the wife and daughter. At their first court appearance, my client showed up in an old 1950s style pinstripe suit and fedora. He was a farmer his whole life, and this was clearly the only suit he owned. He was such a meek and lovely old gentleman. I had to pass my client on to a new lawyer midway through the proceedings because I accepted a job in a different country. But I understand the divorce was eventually granted. Okay, so you're 90 years old, you're having marriage problems, and now you're starting to think like, yeah, I think I just need to move on and move on to different things. I still have some life left in me. Well, that's all for a bunch of wild reasons for divorce. I always like passing the question on to you guys, but I don't think there's going to be too many, So how many of you have been divorced over something minor? So anyways, that's all for today. I will see you next time.